Hi guys, it's Carol. How are you? I'm okay. Um, I told you I just couldn't read this book and couldn't read this book. I must have tried it 20 times and I couldn't get my brain to work. First of all, let me tell you, two of my subs told me they understand perfectly how it is when you can read the words, but your mind doesn't comprehend. Thank you. I, when I try to tell people how that is for me, I'm sure they all just roll their eyes and say, she's lost it. She has no idea what she's talking about. People don't do that. So first of all, let me say thank you to you too, who validated my feelings. Even though I've read articles from medical people, even though my therapist has told me that what happens to me is a true thing. When stress makes your brain just freeze and you can't do some things, like sometimes I can't read. Well, I was determined I was going to read this book. I told you the Friday night, maybe, come hell or high water, I was going to read this book. But I couldn't Friday night or Saturday night. This is Sunday, 5 minutes till midnight. And the book's got to go back. And so, pardon me, I worked and worked and worked to read it. I got to page 105. I know this is a good book. I do know it's a good book. Here's the blurb on the back. A Man Called Ove by Frederick Beckman. Meet Ove. He's a curmudgeon, the kind of man who points at people he dislikes. He has staunch principles, strict routines, and a short fuse. People call him the bitter neighbor from hell. But behind the cranky exterior, there is a story and a sadness. So when one November day, a chatty young couple with two young daughters moves in next door and accidentally flattens Ove's mailbox, it is the lead-in to a comical and heartwarming tale in which one cranky old man and a local residents association will change to their very foundations. Comical. I love comedies. I wanted to read this book. And I wanted to read it because it had been made in a movie that Tom Hanks stars in, and everything I read told me it was a comedy. I like comedies. I wanted to read this book because 2 or 3 of my subs told me this was a wonderful book, their favorite book. They really loved this book. I wanted to read it. Those are the kind of books I like to read about. One of my subs said, it's a great book. There's a cat in it. I like cats. A comedy with a cat. Okay. But I'm going to return this book in the morning to the library, and I'm not going to finish reading it, even though I want to read a comedy. I have to tell you about my background. A lot of you know. Many of you don't know. You're new with me. I'm a good woman. With every breath I take, I try to do the good thing. I try to be positive and uplifting and avoid negative. I'm a good woman. I have a mental illness that I struggle with every day, and I have since I was a teenager, if not way earlier. I was born into a family of mentally ill people. The first time I heard of suicide was when I was just a little girl, 6 or so. We lived in a house, the first house I remember living in, but it wasn't the first house we lived in. But it was a little bitty house, and my mother always told me, why? I don't know why would she tell me this, but that a child had hung themselves in one of the 2 bedrooms. My sister and I got to sleep in the other bedroom. Why my mother felt the need to tell me a child hung themselves in the back bedroom, I don't know. But that was planted in my mind from one of my first memories, I guess. When I was in 4th grade, my aunt committed suicide. There was no doubt she committed suicide. Along that same time, I learned about an uncle who my mother told me committed suicide, but later on, as an adult, I did some research and discovered he had been murdered. He didn't commit suicide, but that's what I'd always been told. When my youngest child was already born, so I was in my early 30s, I had a suicide plan. I was horribly depressed. I had suffered with depression by probably 15, 18 years. I had a suicide plan. I was miserable and horribly depressed. I never acted on it though, but I had a plan. They tell me when you get a plan, that's when, whoa, you need some help if you've got a plan. That was when my youngest child was 1 or 2. He's in his mid-30s now. I've told you that it'll be 13 years in April. I was in a mental hospital. It was because I was so terrified of myself because my mind kept telling me I needed to commit suicide. And I was scared to death of myself because you can't get away from your own mind. I was scared to death of my own self. And I had a suicide plan. One of my subs recently said to me that she is glad that I freely talk about mental illness. I'm going to tell you why. And I've made this video probably 6 times over the last 3 years about why I talk about it. And I think I delete it every time. But my daughter Casey, that's in my videos with me, she and I at one time worked at the same place. We had a mutual friend named Anita. Anita was a sweet woman, very pleasant, nice to be around. And one day she went home and she unalived herself. Casey and I both were shocked. All our other co-workers were shocked because she was a happy person. She was happy that day, but she went home and hung herself. And that is when I decided I would talk about mental illness, because in my family growing up, there were a lot of mentally ill people in our family, but that was swept under the rug. You did not talk about it. And if you talked about it, you got in trouble. And there was a sense of shame that the people in my family had a mental illness. Well, guess what? I have a mental illness. I have major depressive disorder and anxiety issues, and I didn't do one darn thing to bring it on myself. So I'm not ashamed of it. I didn't do anything to cause it. It's just something I got. Like some people get lupus or some people get diabetes. I was lucky enough to get this. I got to page 105 in this book. On page 105, Ove hangs himself. I could not read another page. Obviously, he doesn't die, or else the rest of the book is telling the story. Up until then, I don't know because I didn't read any farther, but on page 105, he hangs himself. I can't read this book. I know it's a good book. You may want to read it. I know it's a good book. Sandy P is one of my subs. She told me it was a really good book. 2 or 3 others of you told me it was a great book. I wanted to read it. Comedy, says comical right here. It is the lead-in to a comical and heartwarming tale. I wanted that. But I couldn't get beyond page 105. And that's why I want to tell you why I could not read this book, other than the fact that my brain shuts down at times and I can't comprehend to read anything. Thank you to the people who tell me they suffer with the same thing. Several of you told me. And I'm sorry that you do feel the same way at times. I'm sorry that happens to you, that your brain freezes and you can't comprehend things. I'm just really sorry, but thank you so much for telling me that you are there. We are sisters. We are sisters in that sense. Anyway, I can't give you a book review of this book because I couldn't get past page 05 when he kicks the stool out from under his feet. If you're a healthy person, I bet you can read this book and love it. I'm not a healthy person. So that's why I can't do a book review on this book. My dogs are angry with me. I can tell. Not angry, they're disgusted because I have the light on and it's now 12:05 in the morning and we're not in bed asleep. So I'm going to take us all to bed and go to sleep, I hope. I hope I'll go to sleep. But that's why I can't finish A Man Called Ove tonight. Before it was because my brain wouldn't work. Maybe my brain was protecting me. My brain knows I can't read about this kind of thing. I appreciate you guys. You cannot imagine the good you do for me. And I will be back with a happy video because Valentine's Day is coming. And I have fun things to do with my grandkids and we'll bring you along. Tonight, I'm going to go to bed and this book will have to go back tomorrow unread. If you recommend books to me, nobody recommended this book to me. I wanted to read it because I heard about the Tom Hanks movie, A Man Called Otto, that it's based on this book. None of you told me to read this book. But if you ever do recommend a book to me, be cautious about the content that you give to me, okay? Because as I read the words and I comprehended what Ove was doing, that brings a terrible fear back in me. The same kind of fear almost that I felt when my mind was telling me, you've got to commit suicide. I was never going to hang myself. Someone I knew at church did such a thing. Anita chose that method. And that was not the method I wanted to choose. But I can't read about anybody choosing any kind of method without it filling me full of fear, because I don't want to go to that place in my mind again. So should you decide to recommend a book to me, it has to be funny. It has to be a cozy mystery. It has to be not that subject matter. And I won't suggest those books to you. Because you know what? Behind closed doors, none of you guys know what goes on behind closed doors. Closed doors in your home, closed doors in your mind. I'm going to go now. Tomorrow's going to be a great day. I'm going to do a lot of prep work for the Valentine things I'm going to do with my grandkids on Tuesday. Tuesday, we'll have a great video for you. I appreciate you guys for being my friends. Bye.